What is crackling, everybody? Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by Numberfire. That is right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and Numberfire.com, as we are getting you set for NFL DFS in the divisional round of the playoffs, breaking down the 4-game slate and both the 2-game slates as well, and talking about each game this weekend. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for Numberfire.com, joined here as always by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for Numberfire. Brandon, it is the divisional round. We get to watch Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson again, so I am in a fantastic mood. How are you doing?
Well, I was going to defer to you and ask how you were doing, because you always ask me how I'm doing, but then you kind of told me, and then I got derailed, so now I'm panicking because I don't have anything planned.
You have no individual takes?
No, which is usually that's my constant state. It's actually very unnerving for me to hear people ask me how's it going, or what's going on.
You would hate the Midwest. I know Pennsylvania is like quasi Midwest, but you're not Midwest. Whereas like in Minnesota, if you see someone, you don't ask how they're doing right away. Like it's like, why are you being so standoffish, bro? And then they'll just be passive aggressive to you for like the next 10 years because that's just what Minnesotans do. But so I think that if I'm going to bestow a mood upon you, it's that we get to watch Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes play football this weekend. So you should be the dandiest of all time.
And Ryan Tannehill?
Nope. Maybe we'll get to see Marcus Mariota for a play and a half again, because he was out there for their 2-point conversion after the Logan Ryan pick six, and they didn't wind up using him. They didn't get the 2-point conversion. Coincidence? Who can say? Not I. 100% completion percentage. The best stat in football, obviously. Yes. I'm not as excited for Tannehill as I am for Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson,
Deshaun?
the 49ers defense, I guess. Yeah.
Possibly Deshaun with Will Fuller, whose efficiency with Will Fuller is actually like the same as Lamar Jackson's on the full year.
Yes. Tough spot for him for sure, but I think it should be a pretty fun game. And just, it's nice to have these top-end teams back on the slate, because the Eagles as a team are very good. The Eagles, when they have all the injuries they had, are not fun to watch. So it's nice to have legitimately good teams back on the slate once again. Yeah. I'm excited for that.
I'm sure some people out there are tilting that we have not mentioned Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson being on this slate as well.
Aaron Jones is also fun to watch. He is questionable as like a DFS asset at times, but as a player, like watching him run is objectively very pleasing.
I meant like we're naming all these great quarterbacks that we're excited to watch, and I'm sure someone might be a little upset that we did not mention Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson to this point in the podcast.
So I love analytics, and I'm an analytics person, and I feel like it's treasonous for me to say that I still think Aaron Rodgers is good, but I still think Aaron Rodgers is good. So this is not this is a pro Aaron Rodgers. At least half of this podcast is a pro Aaron Rodgers podcast. I love him. Think he's still very good. But if I had to choose to watch someone, I'm going to pick Mahomes and Jackson over him. And I don't think that's that outrageous to say by any means.
I mean, and I have no personal biases against any players. I think I'm just objective.
Yeah, because the Jaguars are out. There's no Chris Conley.
Yeah.
I have no Baker. I have no Goff. Mariota's benched. I can just watch. It's great. It's very freeing to not be like staring at Twitter enraged for 90% of the day every Sunday/Monday. So we're good. We're going to have a great weekend. So let's break it down. We'll do so in just 1 second. But first, a quick reminder that the PGA version of the Heat Check is now back every Tuesday, breaking down each week's PGA DFS slate. Brandon and I talk down our favorite plays at each salary range. Kind of more of a laid-back podcast just because we have more time to do so. So make sure you are subscribed to the Numberfire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed so you can get that podcast and the Daily ISO with Tom Vecchio every day as they go up. Just search for the Numberfire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and if you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating and review as well, because those do help us out a ton. Let's dive in here, going game by game for the divisional round. As with last week, at least most of my analysis will focus on the 4-game slate because that's what I'm going to play, and I don't want to lie to you and say I'm going to play a ton of the 2-game slates. it's mostly the 4-game slate for me. I know there's less money on that on FanDuel, but I don't care, honestly. So I'll be talking mostly the 4-game slate. We have the Vikings at 49ers on Saturday. 49ers 7-point favorites. Total here is 44.5. That total has come down a full point since the open. The spread is open by a half point in the 49ers' favor. It was 6.5 and is now at that key number of 7. Some injury notes here. D Ford is expected to come back for the 49ers. He was not an every down player when he was healthy, but he is a good pass rusher. Quan Alexander also potentially back. Kind of like the J.J. Watt situation last week where he's coming off injured reserve, so it's been a long injury. Don't really know what the role will look like for him or D Ford, but hey, it can't hurt to have them back. The Vikings cornerback Mackenzie Alexander is out due to a knee injury. And then Adam Thielen suffered a cut on his ankle in Wednesday's practice. Needed stitches. It sounds like he's good to go. He was on Good Morning Football this morning on NFL Network. He said that he would be doing whatever it takes to play, and he seemed pretty upbeat. So I'm going to assume Thielen's going to play. Stephon Diggs hasn't practiced this week, but he's sick. Mike Zimmer said he is good to go. So my baseline assumption is that both those guys are going to play, and we don't really need to downgrade either of them all that much. Brandon, what is your initial read on this game here between the Vikings and the 49ers?
This feels like a game where if this were the regular season and we were dealing with like a full slate, we'd just be like, we'll play Dalvin Cook. And I don't think we have to touch anybody else, really.
Yeah.
Maybe George Kittle, but
yeah,
it's just one of those games, but we don't have that option on the 4-game or especially the 2-game set. And I mean, there's about middling money and bets on the over, according to OddsFire. Both teams kind of average in terms of pace, in terms of my adjustments, but both teams also 26th or worse in pass rate over expectation. So we could see limited volume from both passers. I think we both like Jimmy Garoppolo from an efficiency standpoint. I have very big volume concerns here, but I don't hate the game. It's one of those games that we're really only dissecting because it's one of 4 games, and I think that's kind of my overall thought. I wouldn't really like this game at all. In the regular season.
And I understand that too, because there is a very legitimate chance that this one winds up slanting toward San Francisco. The Vikings played really, really well last week, and I think that we should note that. And I have generally been higher than the public on Kirk Cousins. However, I do have concerns about him against this specific defense with D Ford and potentially Quan Alexander back, because Cousins doesn't have the best offensive line. And I think that shows up most when they're facing really good opponents. If you look at Kirk Cousins' net expected points per dropback this year based on the defense he is playing, against top 10 teams, he is at negative 0.22, which is really bad because the league average is negative 0.03. Now, Kirk Cousins is well above average against teams that are outside the top 10, and that's noteworthy too. But when they're facing a really good defensive line, especially on the road, the inefficiencies of that offensive line are concerning. Now, you could say, hey, the Saints ranked 12th against the pass this year, so why should we care? Kirk Cousins was awesome last week. And I think that's valid, but we also have to remember the Saints were not at full health. It was not discussed a lot during that game, but Sheldon Rankins and Marcus Davenport are both on injured reserve, and that means that the Saints were not the 12th ranked pass defense. They were for the full season, but they were not in that game specifically because they didn't have those guys. And now they're facing players who can exploit that offensive line. I know the 49ers weren't as good down the stretch, but part of that was injuries, and they're now healthy for the most part. And they just faced really good teams. Now, the Vikings are a good team too. I just worry the 49ers could kind of smother Cousins and get a lot of pressure on him, and that could make this thing a bit slanted, which lowers my view of the entire game.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have somewhat similar numbers on Kirk Cousins, but I actually have 4 games from him against top 12 pass defenses since week 5, because he was really not the same passer through the first 4 weeks. In those 4 games against top 12 pass defenses, he was at 0.12 passing to expected points per dropback. That led to only 226 yards per game. But he had 2 touchdowns per contest in that split. But I mean, he also has 5 straight games with fewer than 20 FanDuel points. The 49ers are not just kind of like the 10th best pass defense. They're pretty firmly one of the the outliers this year. So I think that there are paths, obviously, to Kirk Cousins. Oh, I guess outperforming expectations, like the baseline expectation. But if I had to bet, I think that the Vikings struggle to move the ball.
Yeah. That would probably be my, like, if we're making baseline assumptions, that would be my baseline assumption as well. And that's not to say we can't use any Vikings, because Adam Thielen last week came back and I think legitimized the market shares he had shown earlier in the year. If we look at the games where they've had Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, and Dalvin Cook healthy, Thielen has 27% of the targets. He has 53% of the deep targets and 37% of the red zone targets. And for $6,900, that's really enticing. And the strength of this 49ers defense is not in their outside cornerbacks. Like, Richard Sherman's been awesome, and Akella Weatherspoon has occasionally been good this year. Like, that's not their strength, though. So I think that we can justify receivers there. Stephon Diggs has also had good deep target shares, so you could use him as a pivot off of Thielen if you assume that Thielen would be very chalky. So, and Dalvin Cook last week, 28 carries, 5 targets, 78% snap rate. All those guys make sense. I just think that your concerns about this Vikings offense struggling with the ball should lower us on all of them. Now, if you make the assumption the Vikings are even mildly competitive, all those guys are very much in play. And I think that's good. The other reason why Cousins struggling is such a concern is because I really don't want to use the 49ers running backs. Because if we look at them from week 14 on, which is where Raheem Mostert really earned a bigger chunk of the pie, he still averages 11.3 carries and 1.8 targets per game. That's not great. Tevin Coleman and Matt Breida have basically been non-existent. Breida was active for a game, but didn't play a single offensive snap. So you cannot consider Coleman or Breida. It's just Mostert. But even Mostert, who is $6,700, I think you need to assume the 49ers just roll in order to use them. So you have to kind of figure out the odds that happens and then adjust your Mostert exposure based on that. I don't like this backfield very much at all.
No, Mostert, he closed the season with 4 games where he played between 53 and 60% of the snaps, which is, I mean, he's the majority back, but that's not something that you can hang your hat on necessarily. Mostert is very efficient, but I mean, we also know that he is at risk if the Vikings happen to get ahead. And I mean, it's the playoffs. Anything can happen. Say there's a turnover that leads to short field position and the Vikings get up maybe 14-0. Mostert, not necessarily. I mean, we just can't feel safe with what he would do in that kind of game script. So the baseline assumption here, again, should be that the 49ers lead, that Mostert gets some work. But even then, I don't necessarily find myself gravitating too much toward Mostert.
I would say that he is in a similar realm as like Carlos Hyde was last week, where like I had some because there's a scenario in which he has 2 touchdowns. I think that's within his range of outcomes.
Yeah.
But he won't be a core play for me by any means. More so just like a guy I use every now and then.
Yeah.
Overall, this game I think lacks guys who I'm like, I want to use this guy with regularity. And that is even more concerning for the passing game for the 49ers, given the potential for low volume. But even with that being said, I still think Emmanuel Sanders is one of the better wide receiver plays for the 4-game slate. And he is, I think, the best wide receiver for the 2-game slate on Saturday. Because if you look at the games that he has played alongside George Kittle this year, Manny has 21% of the team's targets. He has 33% of the deep targets. And he's been good in that volume, too. He had one of those games where he had just 1 target, and I think he was still banged up from that rib injury at that time. So he's very capable of a big game, but you can get him for $5,700. Again, the Vikings secondary has not been good this year, and they've got Mackenzie Alexander hurt now. So for $5,700, I think that even with the concerns that the 49ers get ahead and can just play a Kyle Shanahan game and run efficiently and run a lot, even with that being said, I think Emmanuel Sanders is one of my favorite plays in the 4-game slate. What are your thoughts on Manny?
Yeah, I like him a lot at the price. I mean, it kind of doesn't really matter which split you look at because the shares are kind of the same. But we know George Kittle is going to be the top. He should be the top target option. He's got 30% of the targets in the games where they share the field. Sanders, I mean, you already mentioned around 21% for him. Gets the downfield work. At $5,700, he's kind of a no-brainer number one play on the Saturday only slate. And, well, I don't know. He's $5,700 on the 4-game slate. But
Right.
I kind of view Sanders as being a key piece to lineups this week because he's the safest bet in that range at wide receiver. And I kind of feel shaky at wide receiver overall, so that's something we'll probably talk more about as
the
we
Saturday
go.
Receivers are really scary. He's 58 there, and like he would just be a lock for me.
Yeah, there are very few. Yeah, there are very few instances where like the salaries are super different, so I'm just going to stick with the 4 games.
Well, Debo is $500 difference between the Saturday, Sunday, and the Saturday slate, and like Debo is still a play. I like him a lot less than Manny, but the thing that I think bolsters Debo Samuel's appeal is that they've been getting him work as a rusher a lot. He's actually averaged 2 rushes per game the past 4 games. He's got a couple of rushing touchdowns. That means that they want the ball in his hands, and I think that is meaningful. So although I much prefer Manny, I still want some Debo because like clearly they do like this guy. The question I want to ask you is, and this we'll talk about Travis Kelce on the Sunday games. But if for the full 4-game slate, Kelce is $7,500 and Kittle is $7,400. I prefer Kittle, given the things you mentioned with those really massive market shares, and he is the key number 1 guy in this passing offense. So I want Kittle over Kelce. What about you between those 2 guys specifically?
I'd probably flip a coin most of the time, and it's going to depend more on that like a specific lineup that I'm building. But if I really had to pick, it's probably going to still be Kelce. Yeah. The thing for me with Kittle is we know the target shares are great, but the passing volume could just be pretty sapped if the game go. I mean, if the 49ers roll, we know that they're fine not throwing the ball much. So that's my biggest concern. And as you mentioned, Debo Samuel getting more carries. I just have like thoughts of the Saints where you never know who's going to score the touchdowns. It's not quite that bad, but on a small slate, 2 games especially, but even 4 games, you need to know who's going to score the touchdowns. So, I mean, obviously George Kittle can score the touchdowns, but I might go with Kelce over Kittle by a hair.
Okay, I think that's fair. Kittle does have 25% of the red zone targets in the 8 games he's played with Manny. 26% of the deep targets, which is second behind Manny as well. They don't throw deep very often, ever, honestly. But they do so efficiently when they do throw deep. So I think it's pretty close between the 2.
I think the thing since week 13, so if you kind of narrow that sample down, that's the past 5 games. Manny has 6 downfield targets. Samuel has 5, and Kittle has just 1.
Okay.
I mean the downfield work is something that I've been bothered by with Kittle all season because he's so good down the field, but they just don't use him enough.
The good thing is he can turn a short target into a long play.
Oh yeah, we know
even
that.
If he's like being face masked for 30 yards, like that's just what he does. But I think that's fair to point out too. I want to talk about Jimmy Garoppolo because I think that for the Saturday only slate, he is the clear-cut number 2. The problem is he is a clear-cut number 2 in a negative sense too, because it's just like you used Lamar Jackson on the Saturday only slate. But for the 4-game slate, I think if you want to save some salary, Garoppolo is probably my favorite route for doing so. He is $7,800. Russell Wilson, $79,000. I like that a decent amount. Aaron Rodgers is $81,000, but then you get to pretty expensive guys pretty quickly. I think Garoppolo is viable because he has had a couple of pop games since Manny came over. His floor is really bad, and you should be aware of that because of the rush-heavy tendencies that we've alluded to, but he has a path to a ceiling, and I don't think every quarterback on this slate has that. So I think Garoppolo is fine and probably my favorite super cheap quarterback. What are your thoughts on Jimmy G?
In 5 games against top 12 pass defenses this year, he averages 8.96 yards per attempt, 0.21 passing and expected points per dropback. So he's about 2.3 yards per attempt better than the NFL average against good opponents. I have no issues with the efficiency. It's just, again, the volume. So if I'm really trying to save, I don't mind Garoppolo. But for $100 more, Wilson in what is a more likely shootout, although the betting action on that one doesn't really bode
the
well.
total has gone up a point in that one, though.
Yeah. So
like it's 75% of the money's on the under, but like the total has gone up. So so you prefer Wilson over Garoppolo?
Probably, but I definitely am on board with playing Jimmy G.
I think I'm in the same place where it's very close, but I probably would go Russ by a hair. How much Dalvin Cook are you going to have? Because I think we both have concerns about the Vikings moving the ball, but his projected volume is elite, and he's $8,000. I think that he is kind of similar to Derrick Henry last week, where I expected the Titans to struggle to move the ball last week, but I still used Derrick Henry a decent amount because the volume is going to be so good relative to a lot of guys in the slate. So he will not be my favorite running back on the 4-game slate, but I'm going to have a really decent amount of Dalvin Cook. Where do you sit on him specifically?
Sounds like I'm probably higher than you are. The 49ers are more beatable on the ground. They're 19th in rushing success rate allowed to backs. They're 27th in yards before contact allowed to backs. I know they're getting healthier, but I don't anticipate this being a game where Kirk Cousins airs it out in the first half unless they really get down early. But, I mean, we know that Dalvin Cook gets targets. His snap rate actually had been better in losses because he's game script agnostic, and he gets yanked whenever they're ahead. So I think Dalvin Cook is set for just a huge workload kind of regardless. So I think he's probably my favorite running back play on the slate. So
really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. He is not my favorites. He is probably, depending on what happens with Mark Ingram, he could be third-ish, but he's up there. He's not number one. I know he's not number one. That's Damian Williams, and I think he's in a tier of his own. But
yeah, I can see that.
Okay. So any final thoughts on this game for you?
I mean, really, if you look at anything else, there's just not much that sticks out. So probably not.
All right, let's move on to Titans at Ravens, a Saturday night game. The Ravens 9.5-point favorites. The total is 46.5, and that total has come down a point and a half since it's opened. It was 48. And the spread was at one point Ravens -10 at FanDuel Sportsbook. It went to Ravens -8, and then is quickly back up to 9.5. So this is kind of been bouncing around, and there are 15-mile-per-hour winds in the forecast as of right now. As of Thursday morning, that's the only game on the slate that I would say has noteworthy weather, and it would not favor the passing games here. So all those Tanny shares flying out the window. The big injury note here is that Mark Ingram missed practice on both Tuesday and Wednesday after aggravating the calf injury he suffered in Week 16. They still say he has a shot to play, but I would say that's far from a lock right now. So let's start right there, Brandon. What are your thoughts on this Ravens backfield, depending on the status of Mark Ingram?
No, I'm going to defer to you here for sure, because we were talking on Slack, and you were very high on Mark Ingram.
Yeah.
If he plays. So I want to hear your thoughts before I just am indifferent.
So our big concern with Mark Ingram this year was that there were different situations in which he didn't work. If they were trailing, he might not be out there because they could favor Justice Hill. Justice Hill is no longer a thing. His snap rate is below 30% in Week 17 when Mark Ingram is not out there. I have pushed Justice Hill to the side. Our other concern was where if they totally wipe someone and they decide to run Gus Edwards. That's probably not going to happen in a playoff game. Even though I don't have a lot of optimism around the Titans, I think that this is kind of like a Dalvin Cook effect. He's not going to be Dalvin Cook. But it's a similar effect where they want their best back on the field, and their actions throughout the year have told me Mark Ingram is a guy they view as being their best back. In games that have been decided by 10 points or less this year, Ingram averaged 15.2 carries and 2.5 targets per game. That is not a great workload, but it is a good workload for this specific slate and for a guy who is $7,500. So if Mark Ingram goes, I adore him. I don't adore him. He's below Damian. He's below Dalvin, but I would adore him. If he doesn't go, I adore Gus Edwards even more because he is a very cheap way to allow myself to get to Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. Gus Edwards, $5,400 in Week 17 with no Ingram. Edwards had 21 carries and 1 target. He played 68% of the snaps. And again, Justice Hill did get 10 carries, but his snap rate was still just 28%. His highest snap rate of the year came in week freaking 1. They're not going to use this dude. So I think Gus Edwards at $5,400 would be my number one if Mark Ingram can't go. But I'm going to like Mark Ingram too if Ingram does play. Assuming we get like the Shefty bomb on Friday night that he's expected to play. If we get confirmation ahead of time that he's good to go, then I'll feel good about him for sure.
So my real counterpoints are we don't know how healthy he will be. Guys play through injuries in the playoffs. I just am a firm believer that the Ravens do get out ahead by a lot and don't need to run Mark Ingram into the ground. But
you're not going to risk that in a playoff game. If you're up on the Bengals in week 10, you can go with a suboptimal option. But if it's the playoffs, it doesn't matter if it's like 30-10. You're still going to have your dudes out there.
Even if they're not fully healthy, primarily with something like a quad or a calf injury.
Yeah, like if we get assurance he's good to go, I'm good to go with him.
Okay.
But it's kind of like what we talked about with Will Fuller last week, where I want assurance before inactives come out. I don't want to be sweating it with inactives because that means they don't know for sure.
Yes.
Like if I get confirmation today, Thursday or Friday that he's good to go, sweet, let's do it.
Yes, if he's ruled like fully healthy as early as Thursday or Friday, that's very different. If we don't get that assurance, which we might get, we might not. The Titans also are just a really tough rush defense.
But a lot of his appeal comes from like he gets high leverage receiving targets.
Now he does. I mean,
yeah, that's what matters. We're talking.
We're banking on like 1 or 2 receiving targets going his way now. Like,
no, he's averaging 2.5 per game in tight games.
There's no way you're actually excited about 2.5 targets
on a 4-game slate. You bet I am. As a 9.5 point favorite against a team that I don't think is all that good. Yeah, I'm excited about it.
Okay, so let's say it's 28-0. Or 28-7, something like that at halftime.
What are the odds of that?
I think better than maybe you. I don't. You keep calling this a close game, and I don't fully see it that way.
I think all playoff. My baseline assumption for all playoff games is that they are close because it's the playoffs, and teams will treat them if they're close. Because if you yank Mark Ingram when you're up 28-10 and something bad happens, like you can get fired for that stuff.
Yeah. I just don't know if Mark Ingram is like that level of a running back where you get questions like, why wasn't Mark Ingram out there? Well, because he wasn't 100%, and we were up 28 points, and we used Gus Edwards instead.
Yeah, so I think that we're kind of on the same page here, where if we don't get assurance on Thursday or Friday that he is good to go, it's really hard to get excited. Yes. I'm just more excited if we get that assurance.
Yes, okay. That's accurate. I mean, I'm going to use him if he's fully healthy.
Yeah.
I will not use him as much as some other players.
Yeah.
It sounds like if he's deemed like a full go for Friday, it sounds like he's your third option behind Damian Williams and Dalvin Cook. Is that accurate? Because you can't be this high on someone and like rank him 4th or 5th on a 4-game slate.
No, I think he would be 3rd.
Because I don't think
because like would. my projection for him from a volume perspective is similar to Aaron Jones, but Aaron Jones is $700 more. Derrick Henry is $96. I'd probably put Mark Ingram 3rd, yeah, if we get assurance on Thursday or Friday.
Okay, let's move on.
I want to get your Gus Edwards thoughts first. If Ingram can't go,
he would be my 3rd running back then.
Even then, he'd be your 3rd.
If Mark Ingram can't go?
Yeah.
Even that,
because he'd be my 1st.
No, I just meant like I would just play Dalvin Cook. Oh, okay. Sorry. I meant like Dalvin Cook, Damian. Oh. I'd probably put Gus still behind. Yeah, he'd be 1st.
Yeah. I just don't think they trust Justice Hill. Yeah, no, I got you. I don't think they trust Justice Hill. So
yeah.
Based on the way they've used those guys, I think that's a fair assumption for me to make. So at $5,400, he would be number 1. Damian would be 2. Dalvin Cook would be 3 if that were to happen. Other thoughts in this game for you? outside of the running backs for the Ravens?
We can just stick with Baltimore here. I mean, Lamar is $9,400 in the 4-game slate. This guy can bust open any slate, a 4-game slate. You feel like you kind of have to, and you already alluded to this, but on the Saturday only slate, it's a very narrow window where Lamar Jackson is not the best quarterback to have. Now, I know that he is expensive, but it's probably going to be worth it to prioritize him. As far as the pass catchers go, I mean, he really just gives everyone almost an equal share outside of Mark Andrews and Marquis Brown. Since week 8, Andrews has 22% of the targets. Marquis Brown's at 16%. Nick Boyle is at 11%, and then there's nobody else really relevant. Willie Snead played like 74% of the snaps in week 17, which is a game that didn't matter. So like I don't really think there's anything you can cling to aside from Mark Andrews, who's already pricey at $6,800. And I'm always nervous about Marquise Brown. So it might be Lamar and Andrews. Realistically, I probably won't play a lot of Andrews because he's priced up. So it's probably Jackson and one of the running backs.
Yeah, I think Jackson's he's a lock for the Saturday only slate, and he's like easily the number 1 quarterback for the 4-game slate too. The one thing that I would note with the pass catchers is that if we look at the games where Marquise Brown has played at least half the snaps, he has 20% of the targets. He has 28% of the deep targets. Like, those aren't bad numbers. And I wouldn't say this is my expectation, but it is within the range of outcomes that the Ravens have been holding him back throughout the year because of the injuries. He has now had the bye week to get healthy and get rested. I'm pulling up the injury report now. I know that Mark Andrews was limited in practice, but I don't think I saw Hollywood Brown on the injury report, which might be like the first time ever. He is not on the injury report. I don't know if that's ever happened, honestly. And if we assume his snap rates goes to 80%, which I think would be as high as this year, that could happen. And you're giving me a very talented wide receiver at $5,300 against a team that is not very good against the pass. So if I want help getting to Lamar Jackson and I don't have Gus Edwards, I think that Marquise Brown is actually really good. Like, he's really, like, I could try to punt with Willie Snead or Seth Roberts or something like that, but I'd much rather just go Hollywood Brown. I don't want to use those other pieces at all.
Yeah,
I mean, if you're 2-game slate.
Yeah, if you're not playing, if you're not stacking Lamar with Mark Andrews, it's clearly Marquise Brown. Maybe I sounded like I wasn't going to play Marquise Brown at all, but obviously we know what he can do. We saw it early in the year, and you make a good point. I mean, he was on the injury report for most of the year, so if he actually is fully healthy, we could see something pretty nice this week. But if I'm building one lineup and I just want to kind of cash, I'm not playing Marquise Brown.
That's never my goal.
Right. I'm just saying, like, if anyone's out there, like...
No, I shouldn't say it's never my goal. Sometimes you do want to profit with an individual lineup. Like, if you put your cash game lineup into a tournament, like, that's what you're doing effectively. So I get what you're saying. But if I had a single lineup for the 4-game slate, I would not write off Marquise Brown is the way I would say that. He's not as much of a priority as Emmanuel Sanders, but I would not write off Marquise Brown. He'd be in my consideration there.
I mean, I can't fault you. The floor is just... I mean, the floor for every receiver is 0, but realistically...
His is especially 0.
His is especially 0.
It's extra 0. Bold 0. That's very correct. Let's move to the Titans side of things here. Derrick Henry in the wild card round played a season-high 81% of the snaps, 34 carries, and 1 target. And the Ravens, they're ranked 21st against the rush, which is 4th best among defenses on this slate. Partly shows you that rushing defense doesn't matter all that much, but like, they should be able to run the ball. Now, the alternative is the Ravens say, okay, you beat us, Ryan Tannehill. We're going to make you beat us. And they just flood the box with Derrick Henry. Now, Tannehill has shown this year that when he gets advantageous boxes, he can take advantage of them. So I'm not saying that, like, this is definitely going to be their strategy, but I could see a scenario in which they just try to stop Derrick Henry. So thoughts on Derrick Henry first, and then the rest of the Titans from you.
Yeah, I mean, he is pricey. He's
Mhm.
what, 9,800 on the Saturday only slate?
Yeah.
That's nuts. But yeah, I mean, you made the point that I was going to make. Baltimore, not a good rush defense, 22nd in success rate allowed, 29th in yards before contact allowed to running backs. So even if they sell out, you would think Derrick Henry's a lock for like 20 carries, if not more. He had one target last week, which was a screen pass. So the question becomes, if Baltimore just floors Tennessee, what does Derrick Henry do? That was my problem last week. It's
Yeah.
not what happened. So with Derrick Henry, I don't think he's in my he's definitely not my top two. He
Sure.
might be the third back that I try to get in. I don't
Sure.
know how hard that is. Probably pretty hard. Although Damian at 69 helps.
Mhm.
But I don't view Derrick Henry as a must play, which seems scary. Uh, but I'm higher on him this week than I was last week.
I'm a little bit lower because I like the Ravens more than I like the Patriots going into that game. I like the Ravens offense more than I like the Patriots offense. I think that's the
Yeah,
proper way to phrase that. And I think that the odds that game script gets away from him are higher this week than they were last week.
absolutely.
So I am lower on him than I was. But I still think that like if you're rolling out multiple tournament lineups, you have to get him in there because even if they lose by 7, but they're in the game the entire game, he's going to get a ton of volume, and he's probably going to be very good on that volume too.
Yeah.
So
So again, let's say this game goes, I don't know, 21-7 or something at halftime. Do you expect Derrick Henry to be as involved as he normally would be if they were winning, like to start the third quarter? Because I think that they're going to try to stick with Derrick Henry as much as they can.
and I think that they would probably get him involved in the passing game in that situation too.
Yeah,
Maybe.
we did see, like, I can't remember if it was like if he lined up out wide, but he got a screen pass
Yeah.
at the bottom of the
And
screen. So
almost
like,
scored. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, they 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 can't end this game getting Derrick Henry like 15
Right.
touches. It's not going to happen.
Right. I agree. So he'd probably be fourth for me behind, where I put Mark Ingram, if Ingram plays, and behind Dalvin and Damian for sure.
Yeah.
But like that's still going to lead to a pretty good amount of exposure. And I think that's why I would play. Just he will not be in my top 3. As far as the passing game goes, Ryan Tannehill this year, only 18.61% of his dropbacks came against top 10 pass defenses. That was the fourth fewest among quarterbacks with at least 300 dropbacks. So pretty light schedule. He wasn't that good against top 20 pass defenses. 0.04 passing net expected points per dropback. It's about average. He is much better against bad defenses. So I am not overly inclined to use him. He also did not look good last week against New England. They did not use him very much, and I think that's indicative. The volume should be a lot higher this week. He's going to throw for more than 72 or whatever it was yards, but I don't care, honestly. I'm not tempted to use him. AJ Brown's target shares should be fine. The problem is like he struggled against teams that had definitive number 1 shutdown corners, and the Ravens have like 6 of those. So that's concerning. I don't like I think I can rotate in like Corey Davis maybe as like a value play, but like I kind of am gonna hate myself for doing so. And he is below Sammy Watkins, below Marquis Brown, below Alan Lazard, below Will Fuller, below Emmanuel Sanders. So I don't think there's anyone else I must use on this Titans team, honestly.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, Tannehill, you obviously mentioned, you said that he's better against poor pass defenses, which is generally true, but you meant like relative to the baseline
Correct.
expectation.
Correct.
So what that means is Tannehill just has very much taken advantage of poor pass defenses, hasn't really done anything against good pass defenses, just 172 yards on 22 pass attempts and 5 games against top 12 pass defenses. I mean, sure, you extend the pass attempts, but will they? I still feel like they're going to limit his attempts and try to ride Derrick Henry, melt the clock as much as they can. I don't anticipate much AJ Brown at that salary, $7,400 on the 4-game slate. Corey Davis did get 2 targets last week. I mean, nobody had more than 3, and of course Anthony Ferkster and Tajay Sharp.
I had more lineups with Corey Davis, and Corey Davis had targets.
Well, yeah. I mean, he did get some air yards. He was over 60 air yards on those 2, but I think the Titans right now, as far as the pass catchers and Tannehill go, it's a shootout assumption lineup in
Yeah.
case this one just gets nuts, which it could if
Yeah.
Tannehill somehow kind of works his magic. But other than that, it's just Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I think the value wide receivers in the slate are very good, and that pushes me away from Corey Davis, but it also means I less need to jam in AJ Brown. So I think that the strength of this slate is in the value wide receivers and in the expensive quarterbacks and expensive tight ends, and I want to exploit that by just paying down at wide receiver a lot, and that will not be via Corey Davis. Any other thoughts for you on this game before we move on to Sunday?
No, let's just move on.
All right, let's move on then to the earlier game on Sunday. That is between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Houston Texans. The Chiefs, 9.5-point favorites here. The total is 51. That total has gone the opposite direction of most totals on the slate. It has gone up 2 points since the open, and the Chiefs open at -7.5. They were at -10 at one point, but it has settled here at 9.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Couple injury notes here. Andrew Wiley, the Chiefs guard, was a full participant in practice on Wednesday, which means the Chiefs will likely have all 5 of their week 1 starters on the offensive line healthy for only the 6th time this year. They have had insane injuries on offense and still got a first-round bye because the Chiefs are good at football. I know that's a shocker. On the Texans side, Will Fuller, Jordan Akins, and Kenny Stills were all limited in practice Wednesday. Ian Rappaport said he was expected to return this week after missing last week's game. I would take that with a ginormous grain of salt because Bill O'Brien was not as optimistic, and I would just leave it there. Akins seems like he should be back this week. Kenny Stills, I would assume, plays. But my assumption is that all 3 play. I don't think that is a lock, though. So, Brandon, what is your initial read on this game?
We need Will Fuller. Like, we need him because this Texans offense is not the same without him. And if he sits or is like limited and he's doing like the game time decision, we don't know. This could be bad for Houston because if you look at Deshaun Watson's efficiency in games where Will Fuller's played relevant snaps, he has passing efficiency that's on par with Lamar Jackson's this year, which is amazing. In games without Fuller, he's basically Andy Dalton. I know I've made that comparison for a few weeks now, but I think it helps sometimes to give like comparisons.
Yeah.
So this could be, I mean, this is like a top tier offense when Will Fuller's out there just because of what he does for this unit. But if he sits, like, I mean, Kansas City's a good pass defense. They are 5th according to NumberFire's adjusted metrics. They're at home. It's not an easy place to play. So this could get ugly if Will Fuller can't go.
And I think whether it gets ugly or not, the number 1 play in this game is Damian Williams. And I think he is my favorite play on the entire slate, regardless of position, because he's just better than his salary indicates. He is $6,900 for Saturday through Sunday. And when he has been healthy, the Chiefs have been fully committed to Damian Williams. He played a 53% snap rate in week 16, 70% in week 17 when they were trying to get that first round bye, and did. And if you look at just the games where he has had a 50% snap rate, which is 7 games, he's averaged 12.9 carries and 4.6 targets per game. Those aren't huge numbers. That is not Dalvin Cook. That is not Derrick Henry. But when it's tied to Patrick Mahomes, there's a lot of juice in those carries and in those targets. And especially the way the Chiefs use their running backs in the passing game, each target matters a little bit more. So I think that Damian is a lock for me in as many lineups in which I can get him. I will have lineups where I do not have him because things can get weird, but I want to be really much. I know he'll be popular this week, but I want to actively be overweight on Damian Williams. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, so I said Dalvin Cook was my favorite running back play on the slate. It is between he and Williams. I would just side with Cook primarily because he can get 30 opportunities. Williams doesn't really have that. Now, I know the offensive expectations change the efficiency of those, but Williams and Cook are going to be stalwarts in my lineups. I'm going to try to be overweight on both of them. Williams should be very popular at that salary in this offense, but I think it's justified. He is the only running back that they've used like a number 1 all season. So I really don't have anything bad to say about Damian Williams.
Yeah, sometimes chalk is chalk for a reason, and especially at running back, when that is the case, you should be willing to swallow that chalk. My research has shown that for the past couple of years, chalk running backs are far more likely to hit baseline value than any other position. So I think when it makes sense, you do it. It makes sense here. J.J. Watt's back, which does lower the matchup, but I honestly could not care less about matchups when it comes to a guy with this good of a role. As far as the other Chiefs go, we've seen all three of their pass catchers be healthy with Mahomes for 6 games this year. In those games, Tyreek Hill has 26% of the targets and 47% of the deep targets and 29% of the red zone targets. That's nuts. I would say among the expensive wide receivers, he is number 1 for me. I like Davante Adams a lot, so it pains me to say that because I do like Davante, but I put Hill number 1. Kelsey, I think, is just below Kittle, and my desire to pay up for Mahomes and Lamar Jackson decreases the rate at which I will get to Kelsey and Kittle, but I would go with Kittle over Kelsey by a hair. So I think that Tyreek Hill is a number 1 non-Williams guy here. What are your thoughts on the passing game?
Yeah, I'm more likely to get to Hill than Kelsey, just kind of based on how lineups work. Although we do have some value at receiver, so maybe actually by the time I build on my lineups, I kind of view them equally. They're both actually they rate out number 1 on a per dollar basis at their respective positions for me. Mm-hmm. I might still prefer Davante Adams just because he should see like 50% of the team's targets this week, but you can't go wrong with Tyreek Hill, I don't think. The floor has been a lot better than it has been over years past, so we can kind of move past that. And Sammy Watkins, we know that the yardage upside hasn't been there, but at $5,200 in the 4-game slate, if he's my 3rd receiver and I love my lineup, I'm not going to hate it. So it's just nice to get like a 3-headed monster here. We know where the ball's going.
Yeah, and I was going to mention Sammy too. I hate myself for it, but like in that range, it's him or Corey Davis. Like that's the alternative at the same salary. Why would I not take the guy tied to Patrick Mahomes? At $5,200, I think it's cheap enough where like the concerns around him are legitimate, but I'm going to use him anyway. So I think that's the way I view him. But again, it's mostly just as a value play, and I think I'd still put him below like Marquis Brown and Allen Lazard among the super cheap guys.
You probably have to simply because those guys get a lot they get downfield work more, and so the chances are that they get one long catch, which can mean all the difference on a small slate. I think you have to put those guys over Watkins. But now that we've talked about Mahomes a little bit and Lamar, let's say for ease you build 100 lineups. What percentage of your lineups are going to have one of those two as your quarterback?
Like 80?
That's kind of where I was, yeah.
And I think it'd be 50-30 Lamar over Mahomes. Probably.
Close. I mean,
I think with the value receivers, I can get there a lot, and I want to.
Yeah. I might be closer to like 50-50 on Mahomes, but I'm thinking a significant portion of my lineups are just going to go with one of those two quarterbacks.
I very much agree. And I think, like, again, I don't mind Garoppolo. We're going to talk about Russ and Rodgers, and I think both those guys are options. But, like, Lamar and Mahomes are just so good that it's really hard. And again, I know it's not a hot take, so, like, whatever. But, like, I think that on this slate specifically where I have so many value receivers that I can get to them, and I can get, like, I'm tinkering with stuff right now, and I can get to them while still using George Kittle, and it's not that uncomfortable of a lineup. So.
Yeah, and I mean, in my projections, both of those quarterbacks are about twice as likely to hit 25 FanDuel points as any other quarterback. So, if you're looking for someone to score 30 FanDuel points, it's more likely than not going to be one of those two. Which, of course, isn't a hot take, but that matters, and you can't get cute all the time and just fade those guys.
Right. Let's talk about the other side of this game. Deshaun Watson, only $300 less than Patrick Mahomes on the 4-game slate. And the Chiefs' defense is legit good against the pass. They rank 5th once you adjust for schedule, I think that's impactful. So I'm not very high on Deshaun Watson. I think that he is in the same tier as Russell Wilson and Garoppolo because he could rush for 2 touchdowns, which is what he did against the Chiefs in the first game they played. That was a very fluky game on both sides, though, so I wouldn't really factor that in. Will Fuller dropped like 6 touchdowns in that game, and so I wouldn't really factor that in. He does get an upgrade with Fuller, but I still think the matchup is tough enough where I'm not very high on him. I still should use him if I'm doing a good number of lineups, but he's not super high for me. Let's assume that Will Fuller plays. In the games where both Will Fuller and Kenny Stills have played at least 30% of the snaps, DeAndre Hopkins' deep target market share goes down to 32%. Fuller is even with him at 32% as well. Fuller has 22% of the overall targets. Hopkins is at 32%. So it would be a downgrade for DeAndre Hopkins, and I think that's pretty definitive, which is why I prefer Tyreek Hill. I prefer Davante Adams as well. Will Fuller, $5,600 once again for this week. We don't know what the health is going to be. It's kind of similar to Mark Ingram, where I want an assurance in advance of the game before I feel really good about him. What do you think about this Texans passing offense as a whole?
Yeah, so even if Fuller plays and is healthy, we have to deal with the matchup, and that's problematic. Watson's been like good enough in tough matchups whenever Fuller's played. He has 5 games where Fuller's played at least half the snaps and against top 12 pass defenses, which, 5 games, not the worst sample. 225 yards, no more than 280 in any of them. 7 passing touchdowns, but distributed very differently. He had 3, 0, 1, 3, and 0. So, there are paths to like 280 yards, 2 to 3 touchdowns with some rushing. But even then, it's not a guarantee. Kansas City's defense is better than most people think. And I don't even know, but I would imagine like their passing yards and points per game look pretty bad because of what their offense is. But based on the efficiency that we use at number 5, like they're a top 5 unit. So even with Fuller, I'm treating this more as like a differentiation. Maybe it shoots out and Watson actually outduels Patrick Mahomes, but that's really about it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how I view it too. Now, the strength of the Chiefs defense specifically is like against outside wide receivers. They're really good against those guys. So the thought process would be, okay, cool. I will use guys who operate in the middle of the field, which could lead to Jordan Akins, who had a great role last week, or it could lead you to Darren Fells, I should say. Because Jordan Akins wasn't active. But Jordan Akins practiced Wednesday. I would assume he plays, and that makes it hard for me to use Darren Fells at $5,200. Like he's going to get 12% of the targets probably if Akins is active and play 70 to 80% of the snaps as opposed to the 97% he played last week or 96%. So I don't know if it's kind of similar to the Titans where there's no one here I need to use, I would say.
No. So we can't gloss over the backfield entirely, but the Chiefs are.
Yeah. Okay. So I was higher on Ingram. You seem higher on Carlos Hyde than I am. Talk me through that.
He's got, I think, 8 games with at least 16 carries. He has at least 16 carries in each of his past 3 games where he's played extended snaps in all of them. The Chiefs are not a good rush defense. If Will Fuller is not fully healthy, we could see some extra work for Carlos Hyde just to try to milk the clock a little bit. And it's, again, a beatable rush defense. I feel like the floor is about 15 to 17 opportunities for Carlos Hyde, which isn't great, but it is fine for $6,400. And again, it's kind of a beatable matchup on the ground. So that's kind of my vibe with Carlos Hyde. I think he's a decent enough price, and I think that he's not going to get scripted out from the get-go. If they trail, we could see that, but he still plays about 40% of the snaps in losses, and I would think that based on how they've used Carlos Hyde, they want to get him out there. It seems like they don't want to play Duke Johnson that much.
Yeah. So you were talking about him getting 16 carries in a bunch of games. They won every single one of those games.
Yeah. Yes.
And so I think that's like my issue with him is that I don't expect them to come close to winning.
No.
I think the Chiefs are gonna like flamethrower this game.
Okay.
And that's what lowers me on Hyde. Like there is a 20% chance they win by like 7 points or more, in which case, sure, Carlos Hyde's fine. Because in that first game, like they won it, but like it seemed like they wanted to keep Mahomes off the field. That was Tyreek Hill's first game back from an injury. Eric Fisher, their left tackle, didn't play. So he played 61% of the snaps. He had 26 carries and 1 target. That is the most carries he's had all year. The team threw 52% of the time on early downs in the first half. It was 53% for the full season. So like they didn't run a disproportionate amount early in that game. So like I think he's fine, but like I think I'd rather go Raheem Mostert, and I don't like Mostert that much, over Carlos Hyde, just because the way I expect both the games to play out.
I'm not out here like saying Carlos Hyde is a slam dunk play, but it almost sounds like
100% Carlos Hyde.
It sounds like you wouldn't use him at all, necessarily.
If I don't use him, I'm not going to cry over it.
I think that if I'm building 100 lineups, I'm going to have probably like 10% Carlos Hyde in the event that, and that will be designed specifically in games where I'm also loading up on the Chiefs, which might sound backwards, but if
they get a lead with Hyde, then Mahomes get an extra volume. So I get that. That's fine. If I don't get to him, I'm not going to care. Like, if I'm doing 25 lineups, I don't feel the need to get to Hyde. I feel more of a need to get to Mostert.
I'm on board. If you're playing 25 lineups, you don't have to play Carlos Hyde. He doesn't have slate changing upside.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for a running back who can get you at something, which I do think has value, especially on like a 2-game slate, I don't want to rule out Carlos Hyde entirely.
Any Duke Johnson or no?
Again, in those assumption lineups where if the Chiefs do floor the Texans, which is very much in that range of outcomes, then Duke Johnson makes sense. He has a 60% snap rate on average in losses, so it would make sense that he plays more than Carlos Hyde. So,
yeah, he gets 4.6 targets per game in their losses too, so that helps. I would use him in that same situation because he's very cheap, but like I might have more Carlos Hyde than I have Duke Johnson.
Yeah, I think both guys are game stack only options.
I think that's fair, unless you think the Texans win it like 17-7, which I just don't think is going to happen. So if you make that wild assumption, you'll be the only one in that contest to do so, and there's value in that. So you do you, I will pass. To celebrate the start of... Actually, I should ask you, do you have any final thoughts on this game before I jump into our read?
Nah, I think we're good.
All right, cool. To celebrate the start of 2020, FanDuel is offering a 2020 bonus in every January featured NBA shot contest. I think Clint Capella got that last night. Just roster a player who records a 2020 game and win a share of $20,000. For more details, visit FanDuel.com/NBA or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's finish up here with the Seahawks at the Packers. Packers are 4-point favorites here. The total is 47 points, and that total has gone up a point since it opened, even though 72% of the money is on the under, according to OddsFire. The weather here, I guess, is technically noteworthy because it's forecasted at 17 degrees, but there's no wind, there's no snow. Both Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers have experience playing in the cold. They both have big hands, so like I don't really care that it's cold. It's fine. A lot of injuries to note here. The Seahawks were missing 4 starting offensive linemen in practice Wednesday. Joey Hunt and George Fant should be good to go. Hunt was on the injury report all of last week and then played. He's Justin Britt's backup because he's on IR. Mike Upati, their left guard, sounds kind of iffy. Dwayne Brown didn't practice again. He's coming back from a knee injury. He had a scope, I think, on that knee. Pete Carroll said that Brown did some things in practice on Tuesday and Wednesday and that he has a chance to play this week, but Pete Carroll tends to be very optimistic about these things. And him saying that Brown was definitely not going to play last week or seemed iffy was like, oh, okay, so he's definitely not going to play. Pete Carroll tends to skew optimistic. I am not entirely sure Dwayne Brown will play in this game. Jamal Williams, though, should. He was a full participant in practice on Wednesday. He's good to go. Brian Bulaga, their right tackle, cleared concussion protocol. He is good to go as well. So Packers pretty healthy, Seahawks pretty not. What do you see with this game?
I think health probably is one of the key factors here because we know that teams aren't the same whenever they're injured. So that makes a big difference here. This game, I could see kind of going either way. Both teams are about average in pace. Neither team's a good rush defense. So, I mean, a shootout's in the cards if it goes the right way, but that, like, the action on the under is at least making me think about that again, do a double take.
Yeah.
I guess the one big note is that I have the Packers is 26th in adjusted pressure rate. So that helps a little bit for Russell Wilson, who also has 17 carries over the past 2 games. I mean, we know that Wilson can kind of degaff his way to a huge game if he gets that opportunity. It's just, are they going to let him do it?
Yeah. I think I view the Packers defensive line a bit more favorably than that. If you think about the individual players on that team, their best players defensively are linemen. Most of them went to Northwestern, which is maybe why I like them. Zadarius Smith did, whatever. I think I view them that was a big reason why I wanted the Packers on that Monday night game against the Vikings. From a betting perspective, was because their defensive line is good enough to exploit bad offensive lines. And whether Dwayne Brown plays or not, I view the Seahawks as having if he plays and is fully healthy, I view them as a good offensive line. But without Justin Britt and with a banged up Dwayne Brown, I do not view them as being a good offensive line. So I kind of think I could consider the Packers -4 from a betting perspective, and that lowers me on the Seahawks in general. Now, it's not to say I don't like the Seahawks. Russell Wilson has run 17 times the past 2 weeks. I think that with Chris Carson out there just saying, do you, man? Seasons on the line, let's ride, baby. And that's really encouraging. So I think that makes Russ appealing, even though I am pessimistic about this team in general. If you had to pick between Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, I'd probably go Wilson. Which do you prefer? And I go Wilson because of the rushing.
I think probably Wilson because of the rushing, but It's kind of a coin flip.
Yeah.
So if I'm playing the single game, probably be about equal on them, all things considered. On the 4-game slate, I don't. They might be the first place I look outside of Lamar and Mahomes, just because they both can get 20 to 25 FanDuel points because they're good enough. I mean, we're both higher on Aaron Rodgers than a lot of people, and weirdly, we are aware that Russell Wilson's very good, and some people think that he needs a good running game to be good, but
his coaching staff thinks that.
Yeah, I mean, so
free Russell Wilson.
Yeah, and you meant we both actually mentioned the 17 rush attempts over the past 2 games. Since week 17, Travis Homer has 21 carries, Marshawn Lynch has 18, and Wilson has 17. So he's
talking about the backfield quickly, Travis Homer's role has been really good the past 2 games, but Pete Carroll said that Marshawn was ready to take on a larger role. Marshawn's snap rate went down from week 17 to the wild card round, and they won that game. So I don't think it's a lock, but that is enough for me to not use Travis Homer, I think. He hasn't done a whole lot with his chances anyway. His volume wasn't that great. So I'm probably just going to avoid this backfield entirely. I'm not using Marshawn because Pete Carroll said that, but it's enough for me to not use Homer either.
Yeah, I don't think you have to, but he is $5,500. He did get 92 yards against San Francisco in Week 17. Obviously, the terrible game from a efficiency standpoint. So he also hasn't gotten any red zone work. So the ceiling is very capped. But I guess if you're playing the angle of this game being a little more productive, there's something at $5,500 for someone who could play 65 to 70% of the snaps, but that's really the only angle for Travis Homer.
Yeah, I'm not really into the backfields. I think that if I were to name one Seahawks player who really does get me kind of excited, it's Tyler Lockett. Under the assumption that people flock to DK Metcalf after that big game last week, which they should. DK Metcalf is awesome. He is $7,000. Lockett 67. And if we look at the Seahawks targets over the past 4 games, which is when Brian Schottenheimer said that Tyler Lockett was fully healthy, in those 4 games, Lockett has 27% of the targets. Metcalf is at 22%. They both have the same number of deep targets. And Lockett has 44% of the red zone targets. So I love DK Metcalf. I had plenty of him last week, but I think this is a good week to go to Tyler Lockett instead. Lockett's market shares are great. We know he is very talented as well. I'm going to go to Lockett quite a bit at 67. What are your thoughts on him versus Metcalf and just kind of overall for those two guys?
I like both because I don't anticipate this game being one where Seattle doesn't throw or doesn't have to throw, whatever it is. But Tyler Lockett is my preference. He's also cheaper. But I mean, you mentioned already he's been getting the better work since he's been healthy, whatever exactly that means.
Sure.
But on paper, Green Bay's decent against the pass and against wide receivers, but you can only do so much with matchups when the sample of guys we can pick from is so small. But I do prefer Tyler Lockett, and I would probably consider him like a core play because of the price and his opportunity on the 4-game slate. So then by default on the 2-game slate.
I think he's better than every Saturday receiver except for Emmanuel Sanders when you consider salary. The trepidation I have is I guess Thielen is up there too, but I think that Lockett is a top 3 receiver play for me, I would say. And I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, I can't fault you. I mean, they've really been concentrating targets on Lockett, Metcalf, and Jacob Hollister. So that helps a lot, especially when you're trying to build stacks with Russell Wilson. Yeah. We don't always get concentrated targets from Russell Wilson. So this is something we should take advantage of.
Absolutely. Talking about the other side of this game, I also like the receivers there because they are concentrating volume to Davante Adams specifically. He has 35% of the targets the past 3 games. He has 54% of the red zone targets. That's the reason I hesitated before saying Tyreek Hill is my favorite receiver play on the slate. Tyreek Hill still is my favorite, but Davante Adams is 1B, I would say there, versus Hill being 1A. But I also like Allen Lazard as a value play because the reason I cited the past 3 games is that's because those are the games where Lazard's snap rate has been higher. He's played at least 75% of the snaps in all 3. He has 17% of the targets, 22% of the deep targets, and Rodgers threw deep 23 times in one of those games. So if you look at it from a raw deep target number, he's at 2.7 deep targets per game in that 3-game stretch. So Lazard at 54, I think, is also a really good receiver play for this slate. He's below Manny for me. I think he is on par with Marquis Brown, but above Sammy Watkins. Where do you put Lazard among the value receivers?
I think I'm with you. I mean, you said on par with Brown, right?
Yeah,
I think that's about right. $5,400 it's a good price for the role. It's just a matter of, again, whether this game kind of plays above expectation or if this game just kind of is a clunker. But I mean, I'm probably highest on Lazard out of the 3.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I can't fault you for that at all. So I like both Lazard and Davante Adams. The running game is tougher because Aaron Jones is very expensive. He is $8,200. And if we look at the games, Jamal Williams has played at least 30% of the snaps. Jones averages 13 carries and 3.7 targets per game. That's 20.3 adjusted opportunities, which is carries plus 2x targets. He has been Mark Ingram when Jamal Williams has played. And that is not to say that I will not use Aaron Jones, because we have seen this year that it's dumb how efficient he is. And a 2-touchdown game is very much within his range of outcomes. So I'm going to use Aaron Jones, but he is very much below Dalvin, Damian. He's beneath the Baltimore running backs for me. Below Henry. Yeah, below Henry. So he's more so just a guy I'm using out of obligation because he has a very good ceiling and his path to getting there is very clear.
Yeah, that last sentence you just threw out about Aaron Jones is how I felt about him all year. It's just
that's how I felt about him when Jamal Williams has been healthy the whole time.
It's just obligation. He takes such a big step back His average snap rate's 76% in his 4 games, where Williams hasn't played 30% of the snaps, 55.1% with him. I mean, $8,200 is too steep a price to make Aaron Jones a really good process play.
Yeah.
But we know what the range of outcomes is on the high end for Jones, and so that keeps him in the conversation.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. So we need to be mindful of players' ceilings on a 4-game slate. Aaron Jones has the ability he could be the highest scoring running back on this slate. I just don't think that it's the most likely outcome. So I'm putting him below those guys while acknowledging that if I'm multi-entering for tournaments, he will be in my lineups. If I have a single lineup, he will not be. I think that's the way that I view it. But I do want to make sure I am noting the fact that he can just blow up. So I think overall, I like the receivers most in this game, and I think the receivers on both sides grade out pretty well relative to the entire 4-game slate. Any final thoughts for you on this game?
I like it, even though the betting trends are on the under. I will probably go out of my way to get extra Davante Adams, Tyler Lockett stacks or Devontae Metcalf stacks, even though it's pricey and doesn't really fit with what I do normally. But I do think that very easily there's a path for a combination of each receiver getting like 130 yards and a touchdown in this game, which we don't have in every other game.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's the right way to view it too. I think it's probably number 2 for me on the 4-game slate behind the Kansas City-Houston game? Question mark?
Yeah, it just depends on if we think Tennessee can keep pace, but I don't anticipate that, so I'd put it number 2 as well.
Okay, cool. So overall, we're higher on Sunday. So stack up those quarters remaining when it comes to looking at those Saturday to Sunday lineups. That is all we have for today with this 4-game slate for the divisional round. I think that the full 4-game slate is pretty enticing. It can get dicey for the 2-game slates for sure, but I think there are enough plays in all 4 games to be able to do that for sure. So hopefully, contest selection I think is pretty big this week. Getting in contests you are comfortable with and ones with good payout structures. So take a little bit extra time to think about that as well. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald running the video side of things here today, keeping us live up on YouTube. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in today. We'll be back next week to break down the conference championships. Same time, same place on YouTube at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Good luck with this weekend. We'll talk to you then. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by Number Fire.